John, we started working together in the area of systemic team coaching probably in 2009-10 when
Yes.
Peter invited us to join with him in designing a program on systemic team coaching for AoEC and Renewal, Peter's organization.
Yes.
That was the time when we started the first diploma program.
Yeah. Yes. So it was a radical time. Systemic team coaching was very new. Peter had just conceived the idea of the 5 disciplines, and together we were looking at how did we turn this idea into practice and into a training program, into a development of a practice that we now take for granted as systemic team coaching.
Absolutely. And we started with the year-long diploma, and then only later you and I started running the 3-day certificate program, and recognizing that there's something that needed as a companion to that program to help people, I suppose, solidify their thinking on how to work systemically, how to move from team coaching, which was internal to the team, to bringing the outside in perspective, and how to really set up that type of work, and how to partner with a team and team leader for a prolonged period of time. That was what really gave birth to the first systemic team coaching book, wasn't it?
And indeed, I mean, Peter Hawkins had written, his leadership team coaching book, which gave a huge amount of depth and a very profound philosophical position about team coaching. But what we set out to do was write something that was very practical and accessible, that talked about the process of systemic team coaching that our students on the program could take away and really use. And that has been the feedback that we've had over the years about it. It's really been a handbook that you can easily carry around and open. And as one of our colleagues said, it kind of reminds me of the times that when we get a bit stuck, what are the things we need to pay attention to? What are the pitfalls? And we put a lot of time and focus into making this accessible, really, to
of course, yes. And not just the process, because we have tried to build in, I think, something of the personal development that needs to take place, the shift in terms of what we call systemic being, as well as the how-tos, which again, I think it's been quite gratifying to know that that's been helpful material for people. And then, of course, we started with that being a companion to the face-to-face systemic team coaching certificate program that we run through AoEC. And then in 2020, of course, the year of the pandemic, we started to, with Peter, partner with what's now coaching.com through the Global Team Coaching Institute, which has taken systemic team coaching to a much broader audience across the world, which has been fantastic, and running virtual programs for team coaches who are going to coach teams virtually, and particularly during the pandemic had to coach teams virtually. So not only has the book been a companion to many, many more hundreds of team coaches across the world, we've also recognized the need to update and revise both our practice in systemic team coaching, because working virtually more predominantly is many common skills, but requires a different energy. But also we've been able to distribute this book to large numbers of people. So
I think one of the incentives to write the second edition was exactly as you said, the virtual nature of the world as it happened during the pandemic, and we've needed to adapt in terms of delivering the systemic team coaching certificate and the diploma, but we felt it was important to talk about some of the challenges that arise in this work, and some of my experiences of running virtual programs or virtual team coaching sessions is getting the connection with team members. I find that a real challenge in the virtual environment, to ensure that people are communicating and connecting, since it's a key part of the teams is doing that. And I wondered what your experiences were.
Well, I think two things come to mind. One is the virtual environment, and certainly the requirements to use it during the pandemic also presented a huge opportunity, because teams needed to stay connected, and team coaches and teams found ways to stay connected in shorter spaces of time. So I think the practice of team coaching has shifted quite a lot, and become more integrated into day-to-day teamwork, if you like.
Yes.
So that often interventions are 2 or 3 hours long and more frequent, compared to the pattern where you might have a 1 day or 2 day offsite and less connection in between. So I think it has presented an opportunity. That, of course, creates a pressure on us to work differently in order to get value, to create meaningful pieces of work out of shorter interventions. So that's one challenge.
And what I find really much easier is being able to intervene on business as usual meetings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because then we can comment on what we observe and make that more frequent. So it's easier to turn up to a virtual 2-hour business meeting. And we write about the TOOTS, time out of time, the ability to call a timeout and stop the process and give feedback to the team on how they're focusing and what's happening in the relationships. So we've added that into this second edition.
Absolutely, really essential. And that whole thing about using time becomes even more important, I think, sometimes when we're working virtually, because of the importance of keeping up the energy. So thinking creatively about how you build energetic exercises on and off screen while you are team coaching has been particularly important. The other thing that I think has been really important that influenced my energy around a second edition of the book with just what we see going on in the world. Well, we've known for many, many years that the world needs teams and collaborative working to address the multiple challenges that we face as humanity. But one of the things since the pandemic, there have been so many challenges, certainly in organizations that I've worked with, to do with engagement and mental health, and the unnecessary nature of some types of team working that are necessarily toxic and dysfunctional, and helping leadership teams and teams throughout organizations explore how they can build healthier relationships, healthier leadership, healthier working climates, to engage people and help them want to work, and therefore help more productive relationships, I think has been even more acute actually in the last year or so.
Yes, well, we all know about the stress that's occurred through the pandemic on many levels, and the impact that's had on teams and their ability to connect. So, I know that in the work I've done, paying more attention to what we call the connecting in our 5 disciplines model has been more important. I noticed that I spent a lot more time there before we'd move into the clarifying and focusing on the strategy and the direction. That giving more space for people to arrive and share their anxieties and uncertainties has been more important, I think, now than I remember before the pandemic. Maybe we're still dealing with the after effects and that will change.
Well, I think the new pressures came along post-pandemic, supply chain challenges, the whole hybrid environment, which is challenging to work in, and then all of the conflict in the world and the continuing global climate crisis. All of these pressures impact on the wider systemic climate of a team. And we know, it's our philosophy and belief that that impacts on how teams operate and relationships within. That's the philosophy of our work, isn't it?
And one of the changes too that I was thinking from writing our first edition, I remember way back then when we started, there was a real reluctance to engage with stakeholders. I remember that was a big issue in getting the team leader and the team to feel confident to engage with the wider system. Most team coaching is based on what's going on inside the team. And our approach is always, as you said, inside out and outside in. How do we bring in that feedback? Now, what I've noticed now in my work is it's become more acceptable to engage stakeholders. I think maybe our influence over the last 10 years in terms of getting teams to think outside in has helped, and more and more focus. And I think we bring that out more in the second edition, the importance of connecting with stakeholders, how to do that effectively, how to be more efficient and build more of a relationship, the connecting discipline with our stakeholders. And it's great to see that. And I notice in my supervision of systemic team coaches that is becoming more normative. They're finding it easier to do that.
I think the whole question of helping the team engage with its stakeholders is still, there has been a huge amount of progress in the field. And I think there is a lot more to be done. And one of my hopes in this second edition is that we are providing a few more pointers to help team coaches secure that angle early on and put in place the importance and find ways of, hopefully, find ways of having the conversation earlier. Because although in some sectors, in some parts of the world, I've seen the whole practice of stakeholder engagement increase, in other areas, I've seen coaches finding that challenging. Either that's because the team or team leader are reluctant, or it's because the actual team coach is rather reluctant. And so I have found recently quite a lot of inclination to focus the team coaching more on, certainly in the first half of engagement, on the relationships internally, and then finding it quite hard to take an external perspective later on. So I'm hoping our second edition provides some more guidelines and guide rails, if you like, to help team coaches address that.
And I wonder too, as I just said that earlier, that it's maybe my sense of authority and my experience where I'm saying this is crucial. I can't really engage with team without, it's just like, that's it, guys. We can't do a proper engagement with the team and how it's functioning without reference to stakeholders. So it may be that just, over the years and writing the second edition, it's become, yes, there's really no other way of doing it. I mean, of course, you can do, you do internal teamwork, and there's a lot of great books out there on relational team coaching about what happens inside it. But certainly from my point of view, the team in isolation is
absolutely
just not viable.
Well, I always say to participants, the first few words I say to a potential new client is, I work as a systemic team coach. This is who you're potentially engaging, and we're having that conversation, not another conversation.
Yes.
Making it clear like that, I think sometimes is very, very helpful. They know where you're standing and where you're likely
That's right. And I think our confidence, and this is what we try to get across to our students on the program, is to be confident in that and believe that this is a really effective way forward. And if we come with confidence, it helps our clients who are a bit anxious about being judged and, getting feedback, that the critical feedback that they're not good enough, or, it helps them overcome that and actually hear the reality. Because if they think they're going to be criticized, then they're going to be hiding in some way. Better to get the reality out there. This is what I say. Better to hear the feedback than to imagine what's going on and pretend that you might be doing a better job than you're doing.
And building effective relationships with stakeholders is not just about uncovering negative feedback. It's also being able to have the conversations that you need to have in order to help your team work more effectively and create value for all your stakeholders.
And making demands on stakeholders is sometimes it can feel, especially if you're relating to a senior team, that, oh God, I've got to do what they say. But in actual fact, we encourage then, both in the book and on the programs, to be robust and challenge, make demands of stakeholders. In the second edition, we've spent more time looking at how the systemic team coach and the team can address the stakeholder groups. We have talked much more about taking that time to identify who the groups are and how to build up a stakeholder map of those who, and the levels of influence. And so when I'm working with teams, especially face to face, I invite them to have representatives for stakeholders and encourage the movement and having a conversation, an imaginary conversation with the stakeholder in preparation and understanding of what are the dynamics that are going on there. That's a bit more challenging in the virtual world, and sometimes I'll use whiteboards for mapping the stakeholder groups. But it's really a very dynamic process that I found really helpful for myself and my own organization, but also in working with teams.
I find writing a very reflective learning process, John. The whole process of reflecting back on my own practice as a systemic team coach and noticing what are the learning points, where are the things that I might have done things differently, what were the shocks and surprises, reflecting on those in a self-supervisory process in writing is massively developmental. But one of the things that struck me as I integrated a new set of case studies from my own practice into the second edition was yet again this whole process of use of myself as an instrument as a systemic team coach. Those moments where I felt, oh, I'm feeling shaky here, what's going on, and recognizing as I'm working with a team that shakiness may not just be me feeling slightly anxious, but probably is a shakiness in the team. and being able to confidently reflect, I notice there's a shakiness here, or I notice there's a going around in circles and an anxiety. I remember one team that I was working with, I said, I notice that you're really desperate to speak to your senior stakeholder about this, but also there's something really pulling you back. I'll use that physical shift. And they said, absolutely, we know that he needs to know, but we're terrified that if we tell him, he's going to be so distressed. But it was that I couldn't have made that intervention without noticing my own, shakiness here. And it's that recognizing, and as I wrote some of these case studies, recognizing at a deeper level the importance of being able to bring that out into the written world, because we all have to follow our own journey in this. And one of the first steps, of course, is knowing ourselves and our own triggers. And one of the next steps is actually being much more tuned in, using what we call the facilitator map to stand naked in front of the data, as it were, manage our own chatter, know what's our chatter and what's not, but then to be confident enough to take a step.
Yes.
Someone said to me once, what do you do if a timeout goes wrong? And I said, well, I think the important thing to remember is that there isn't a wrong or a right. There's an experiment, there's a choice and a taking a step. And so long as you stay connected and confident, whatever happens as the next step, just be curious about it.
Yes. Just
be curious, stay present, rather than I'm right and I'm in and I'm wrong and I'm out. Stay present in the conversation, and more discovery will happen.
And that's, of course, very difficult in an organization that's very geared to getting results and performance, and you've got to show up and you've got to be right. And then the coach also feels they've got to be doing a good job. And we talk in the book about moving from customer-supplier relationship, where you're there to deliver and they're going to then critique your capability, to moving into a real partnership where you're working together. And as you're saying, when we get there, we are willing to bring ourselves, in a sense, be vulnerable and share our own internal reactions to what's happening in the team, in the moment. Very much my Gestalt background of being there in the moment and engaging in the relationship becomes incredibly rich, especially in the co-creating discipline, where we are working with building what we talk a lot about, psychological safety. In the relationships, and we talk a lot, both in the book and on our programs now, about psychological safety and the importance and the value of the creativity that emerges from that. But that comes from bringing ourselves into the dialogue.
Right from the word go. I often have conversations with team coaching supervisees. I'll say, so what is your relationship? Describe your relationship with the team leader. And sometimes I'm surprised where they say, well, don't really have that. It's very transactional, haven't really built a relationship yet. And I hold very dearly to the principle that relationship and how it works, and the willingness to work in partnership, and being able to establish from that first scoping conversation that we can work in partnership, is absolutely critical to the success of the work going forward. You can't postpone it to later on down the road.
Yes.
That's not to say you're favoring the team leader over the team, but given that systemic team coaching is about creating shared leadership, we have to secure the engagement of the team leader and their willingness to shift their own leadership if the leadership in the rest of the team is going to shift. And that has to be a partnering relationship.
And I have to say, even with years of experience, I had a client recently where that was really difficult. It was quite evident that the team leader was really quite introverted and distant and wasn't really willing to engage. And I had to go very slowly, and it took a long time, but it really gave me a feeling for how the team were grappling with the fact that they had a team leader that wasn't really willing to engage, was staying very transactional and authoritarian. So it was very slow, and I had to do a lot of work with the team to support them in not so much challenging, but requesting more, inviting more the team leader in. But it really was crippling the team in being able to move forward because they were all holding back and, not connecting. So, and sometimes the work becomes quite slow in that, and the quick results that you want to see happening just don't materialize.
Well, yeah, and the quick results that the team leader wants to see as well aren't materializing.